Okay, welcome, Juan. It's so good to have you on the podcast. I can't believe really that we haven't had you on yet. I know we've been long time social media friends, and now you're here. Muchas gracias. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. I know it's been a long time coming.
Yes. Okay. So first, walk us through your own feelings, your own experiences, learning about the U.S. actions in Venezuela in real time. What was happening in the family group chat? Tell us, walk us through that experience.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're talking about it, something that happened on a Friday night, early Saturday morning, depending on where you are. I think it's contextually important for the audience to know that I'm also based in LA here in California. So around 10:30 Pacific time, I started getting messages from my family saying that there were loud explosions and what appeared to be fire and smoke in the distance, and it was very unclear right from the get-go what exactly was going on. As the hour ticked by, more video footage claims tried to essentially it started making their way through social media, and ultimately it was kind of like a mixture of feelings, right? Because you're watching this through very grainy, dark video because people are, telling each other like, don't go near a window, don't go outside. Like no one really is sure what is happening. So the speculation was that, is this the United States striking Venezuela? Is this the Venezuelan military, staging a coup of some type? Is this just kind of like an coincidental, rise from the city? I mean, from the people of Venezuela? It's very unclear. It's very early in the morning in Venezuela. And, I think I found myself kind of conflicted primarily because as I mentioned, you're seeing these images develop through very dark cell phone footage, and obviously you don't want to spread misinformation or get it wrong. And I found myself in a very distinct position where basically the news story was breaking through my family
Mm.
at the same time that I was trying to phone in anybody that would pick up the phone, right? Like I was calling my parents who live in Florida. I was trying to call journalist friends who, I'm like, I don't even know if you were awake, but like, you need to know that this is happening.
Right, right.
So it was a very unique and distinct position to kind of be in Friday night, early Saturday morning.
Yeah, okay. So then it's Saturday and you learn what has happened. And what is, I mean, there, like, and we will link this piece in the show notes. I know you wrote a very thoughtful piece that was then republished in the Latino newsletter, which is how I got wind of it. But what are the reactions from Venezuelans? What was your reaction, and what has been the one thing that's true across the board and some of the differences that you're seeing?
Yeah, I like you mentioned, I published on my newsletter, which is called Double Click, and folks can subscribe. I think it started off as a very quick news type of like share fun news and things to kind of keep you ahead of the internet, and now it's kind of become like this thing where I'm sharing my personal thoughts about Venezuela. I think for broader context, I was born and raised in Caracas, came to the United States at the age of 11, lived undocumented for a number of years. I'm now a U.S. citizen, and um, you know, Venezuelans find themselves in a very complex situation. I think one of the main lines in my write-up from this past weekend is essentially that over the next number of days, months, and however long this takes, you're going to see one main constant, and that is basically that Venezuelans, just like many people on a variety of different political leanings, are going to celebrate the ouster of Nicolas Maduro, right? The dictator who essentially collapsed power, underneath him, ran fraudulent elections, and violated the human rights and dignity and liberty of many, many people. Um, and that's basically where the agreement ends,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We're seeing now, I know that we're recording this a couple of days, before it airs, but I think that it's important to note that you are already seeing as of Monday, the lines of disagreements as to what should come next in Venezuela. And for me, um, it's important to kind of like call and say those things out, mostly because you have pundits going on news media trying to essentially give you geopolitical context and the history of the relationship between Venezuela and the United States and so on, and that's all fine and great, right? I think that that's obviously what's needed. People need to understand what essentially has happened, and I think that at a moment like this, where we find ourselves in the intersection of history, that people need to understand what happens when a foreign power intervenes in a country and tries to essentially nation build it, right? Like history is a great teacher, and we should essentially take heed on everything that has happened. However, we live in a moment in time where relations in the region are not normal, right? Like the United States government has essentially all but essentially stated that they took Nicolas Maduro out, that they're ready to do another strike. And I'm not saying this hyperbolically, like
These
President
are
of the
the
United
words, right?
States,
These are things that have
right?
been said, and this was done unilaterally without regional support, without congressional
Correct.
support. There's so many things that make this quite concerning. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that that's basically what people need to take care of, right? Like there's no regional support, right? Like Colombia is essentially all about decrying, what essentially happened. This is just me kind of like repeating back what has been said, not trying to agree or disagree, and we can dive deep into that. But it's important to essentially state these things for what they are. Mexico has concerns. Colombia has concerns, and I think when we look at essentially what has been happening, is important to take a quick look at the region. It's important to take a quick look to where Congress is and isn't. Right, this was done very early in the new year. Congress is not in session. People are still out on vacation and coming back to the Hill and to their respective desks. Not just in Congress, but in news and
All of
other
us,
places.
all of us here right now.
So so yeah, I think it's like a lot of those things are really important. And past all that, right? Past everything, I think the one big moment that people need to also take away, like the one big thing that also people need to take away from this, right? And I published this on social media, is that news media, politicians, whoever, they need to talk to Venezuelans about Venezuela. And I'm not saying that like in like, oh, well, like, we need to make sure that the voice of Venezuelans is centered. I'm saying that because Venezuelans from Miami all the way to LA have very distinct and unique opinions about what should happen next, what the role of the United States should or shouldn't be, and ultimately what the future of Venezuela would look like in the coming years and months. I, on a personal level, think it's too early, right? Just because of the level of uncertainty and lack of details that we have right now. If you ask Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, or the White House who is running Venezuela, and they say we are, well, who is this we?
Yeah, what is this
And
we?
and more importantly, I think the bigger question is, which is probably something that has been supremely under the report that's coming to light now, is um, whether or not Donald Trump is just going to leave the Nicolas Maduro apparatus in place now, right? Instead of consulting with Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado and the Venezuelan opposition, that basically opened the door for a lot of this type of stuff that we're witnessing right now, for this strike and everything to happen. And if Donald Trump and the White House are willing to deal with Nicolas Maduro's handpicked, vice president, or as she describes herself as the caretaker of Venezuela, interim, through a statement, then it's going to leave a lot of questions. It's going to leave a lot of questions as to, if we took out Nicolas Maduro, who is this really bad guy, again, we don't disagree on that, but we're going to deal with the remnants of his administration. Aren't also those the conspirators and enablers that essentially stood by as Nicolas Maduro did and said what he wanted to?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Then we know it's not about regime change, at all,
exactly,
right? It's like,
exactly.
what are the next steps so that you could prove to us this is actually about regime change? We know it's not because they've been pretty transparent actually say, no, it's about the oil. So it's very concerning about the future. But I think what we could all agree on, we the listeners at Tamarindo, I think, is that it's about self-determination. Where are the
Yeah,
Venezuelans in determining their future? And who are
correct.
we to determine it for them, right? That's one thing we could agree on. Now, and it's been really concerning seeing in my feed a lot of Venezuelans. Of course, everybody's celebrating that Maduro's gone, but also a lot of like, yes, Trump, we love you, Trump is great. And I just want to know, Juan, what evidence can we point to of Republican-led or Trump-led empathy for Venezuelans or the plight of Venezuelans either here or abroad? What evidence?
I it's it's hard to point to a concrete example, right? Like right now, it's natural, right, for people to celebrate the current administration because they're seeing them take action, whereas we've been having a conversation, and I'll say this, we talked about Venezuela being, a deteriorating state under really bad, governance, first from Hugo Chavez, now from Nicolas Maduro, for decades, right? I
Right, this is
left,
not
I
news. This is,
exactly.
and yeah, your personal story is evidence of this, right? Yes.
Yeah, I fled Venezuela with my family in the year 2000. We lived in the United States for now 25 years, and that's not a secret, right? I think ultimately people are tired of waiting and they're seeing this action by the administration, unfortunately for what it is, like a quick result type of situation in terms of like results have been made, progress has been made, Nicolas Maduro is out, and then the questions about this did this need congressional approval? Unclear. Is there a plan? Unclear. And that's what I'm looking forward to in the next couple of weeks and days to come, because I think past the celebration, the White House and this administration is going to have a lot of answers. Excuse me, it's going to have a lot of questions to answers, and I don't think that the specifics are cemented anywhere. I think the situation just kind of based on, if you want like a concrete example, this past weekend on Sunday, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, went on Fox News and said that Venezuelans in the United States who previously had temporary protected status or TPS could apply for a refugee status. And immediately, almost minutes later, the DHS Twitter account contradicted what the secretary said.
Yeah.
And I point to that as a specific example because right now on Monday there isn't essentially an idea of what's going to happen to the Venezuelans in the United States who have pending asylum cases, who have expiring TPS protections, who may have other legal protections under, of that prevent them from being deported back to a country that right now is, by all means and definitions, in flux and a transition. And one has to really ask the question: if the United States is going to govern or manage or quote unquote run, this is their wording, Venezuela through Nicolas Maduro's own vice president, what kind of guarantees that improved conditions are going to exist, right? That people who have been deported there aren't going to be subjected to abuse and neglect, that somehow the country under this whatever new phase it finds itself in going to protect the life, dignity, and human rights of these people, and what's going to happen to the hyperinflation the country is experiencing, the rate, the lack of healthcare and access to food, and the increasing crime. And I think that those are very valid questions for anybody. Um,
Yeah, it's not like
so
it's not like you just flip a switch, everything's okay. But I think you've given us many examples that actually point to the contrary of Republicans having any sort of empathy or care for Venezuelans. You've just given us some examples of letting TPS expire, the way that Venezuelans are framed by the leadership of this country, the fact that Venezuelans were deported to a country that wasn't their own to be tortured. So there's quite a lot of troubling examples that
Right,
actually Republicans don't care at all about Venezuelans.
right.
So
I
we
think
really have a lot of uncertainty.
just to kind of like chime in on that as well, you have essentially, and again, this is probably one of the biggest examples, is that you have a federal judge not too long ago, essentially a number of weeks ago, stating that the administration had to give due process to the dozens of men who were deporting to CICOT. This is a gulag, for a better lack of a term in here. Um, you know, and now, given the situation, and again, this is the DOJ speaking, saying, telling the court, telling a federal judge that given the situation in Venezuela, that they're going to need more time to figure out how they're going to offer due process to these men, or if at all, that were deported by the Trump White House to a third country to be tortured in what's all but a terrorist holding cell. Um, and there's still no clarity about that, right? I think that again, the overwhelming evidence points to that uh, there's this overwhelming assumption that now that Nicolas Maduro is gone, that people will just naturally flee or return back to Venezuela. And it's just almost inconceivable how that is essentially going to happen in a very natural way when the Venezuela that was under Nicolas Maduro experiencing hyperinflation, food shortage, insecurity, rolling blackouts is still the Venezuela that we're experiencing today. It's not
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the infrastructure got better from one day to the next. It's not that crime went down from one day to the next. That's the reality.
yeah. So lots of uncertainty. That's one thing, that's for sure. Now, what message do you have for Democratic leadership right now? What opportunity do they have to demonstrate any sort of accountability, any sort of pushback on or maybe if we know Republicans have given us many, many examples of how they don't care about Venezuelans, how can Democrats show something different? What's your message to them?
Uh, I'm assuming that in the coming days and weeks, there's going to be a lot of questions from Congress, especially about, whether its role in the situation. There's likely to be calls for hearings. There's likely to be calls for secretaries of different departments, Marco Rubio, Christine Noem, to appear before Congress and answer the questions of senators and House members. I hope that in their planning, right, that, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, they consider Venezuelans who have been in the United States, established for quite some time, and who are, also have an opinion and say in this matter. You know, Venezuelan Americans, U.S. citizens, long, legal permanent residents, so on and so forth. But at the same time, that they consider new arrivals and people who fled Nicolas Maduro, Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela, and recently came to the United States seeking shelter and protection. And what is going to to kind of get a really big holistic picture on the Venezuelan community as a whole, as it pertains to the United States. I hope that the next thing that also happens is also that there's questions about the future of Venezuelans in the United States and their treatment. Are they still going to be ICE targeted and detained and then deported back to this country? That, again, as of right now, still unclear who's running the show over there and what kind of guarantees that they have that their life is going to be significantly better than, say, trying to apply for asylum or, be shielded through TPS and other programs until there is credible betterment of Venezuela as a country and as a society back abroad. Um, and then the last thing is just essentially we've seen the overwhelming lack of enthusiastic response from the administration whenever its policy changes are implemented, right? Like the administration unfortunately has seen a lot of criticism for trying to silence people who disagree with our moves, etc. But I think that what this invites, right, for Democrats is an open channel to speak on, what our role as a nation is, what their role as Congress is, and ultimately how they can rise to ensure that the community that is celebrating this administration right now, today on Monday, though a couple of days after the strike and capture of Nicolas Maduro, is also protected in the days and weeks to come. So the proof is going to be in the pudding, because what ultimately is being done is that, yeah, we knocked out Maduro out of power, etc. But that's kind of like where the agreement and celebration ends, right? If I think Democrats are going to see a very big shift, or at least can expect to see a shift, if Donald Trump comes back out tomorrow or next week and says, "Well, we're going to deal with the vice president of Venezuela, who was, Nicolas Maduro's handpicked successor, and we're just gonna deal with them. Like Maria Corina Machado can just stay in Oslo or in Spain or whoever, and that's how it's going to happen." And I think that's my worry, right? That we took out one bad actor
Just to
to
leave.
just to deal with
Yeah.
another bad actor.
Bad actor junior. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us your thoughts. Again, this is fresh off of this happening. Who knows what will happen tomorrow or 2 days after this when you all hear this. But, one thing that first of all, I appreciate you speaking to us. And it's important for us to know that, yes, while we do want to center the voice of Venezuelans, and we've done so here today, we don't live in bubbles, right? What happens in every country ripples everywhere else. And I know there's a lot of concern in Latin America. There's concern by me as a Mexican specifically about, what if Trump can just whenever get up one day and unilaterally take out a leader of, no matter how horrible the leader is, for loose excuse, and then not even have a plan for that. Who's safe? Who is
Yeah.
safe? That's really what's concerning here. So thank you so much for this. I've had, lots of uncertainty. And the other big takeaways from you is like we do need to hear from Venezuelans. We want to make sure there's Venezuelan self-determination, and that there is, I know that this has been going around on social media, like you break it, you buy it. So, what is this for how involved will we need to be? Because we now have some responsibility.